Hey everybody, welcome back to Shutter Magazine. I'm Dustin Lucas, and today I'm going to be giving you 5 tips for faster editing. This is going from Photoshop back into Lightroom. I know that sounds crazy, but the amount of time I spend in Photoshop doing actions and masking and toning, spending all that time working on one image at a time, it's just way too slow for me when I want to give a bunch of different sort of down and dirty creative edits. So I'm going to show you Lightroom, how all of these different masking techniques, 5 tips for faster creative edits, and looking at a few things. So just to kind of show you before and after, this image was worked on a little bit in Photoshop for some composite work and working a little bit with evening out the background. But doing something like this can fully be done in Lightroom. So some of these things, these 5 tips that I'm going to walk through, it all starts with color profiles. I've talked about that on previous articles, how sort of amazing and crucial this tool is, but it's a one click of the mouse. Color profiles, we'll jump into that. Tip number 2 is target adjustment tools. You got to use them, right? I don't want to think about what to do other than clicking in an area, knowing if I want to increase or decrease color, brightness, saturation, tonality, all those kind of things we can do with the target adjustment tool. Another really quick way to burn your background down and have your client stand out, as she does here, is using the radial filter and inverting it, right? Having it apply to 90% of the image, and then using a radial filter to basically mask out our subject. So the subject pops, everything else gets kind of burned and pushed to the back. Tip number 4 is going to be a graduated filter, right? So using those for the sky, dragging it in, getting the sky a little darker, a little more intense with clarity to bring some of that kind of structure and a little more HDR look out of the sky when it's softer, those softer puffy clouds. And then using a graduated filter as well to do the same thing to the foreground and the structure, burning that down, bringing some clarity in, but doing it separately from the sky, doing it separately from our subject, very important. And tip number 5 is going to be sharpening and noise reduction with the adjustment brush. So we want to sharpen and reduce noise of our entire image, but we don't want to sharpen the face or over sharpen her skin tone. So using a mask to bring some of that back down, a little bit of skin softening techniques like that. So let's jump into tip number 1, and that's going to be color profiles. All right, so tip number 1 is going to be using color profiles, right? So in previous articles, I've talked about exporting LUT files from Photoshop. That's where you can take adjustment layers made in Photoshop. Specifically, adjustment layers can't be anything pixel-based or image. It can't be any image files or things like that. And you can create a Lightroom color profile to apply with one click. And that's exactly what I did here. So with my color profiles, especially my creatives, I like to use something that's a little more, it's pulling down the saturation, it's going to do a kind of color grading shift here, some things that I can't necessarily do real quick or create a preset for in Lightroom, but I have a little more flexibility and a little better managed tools in Photoshop. When we bring that stuff into Lightroom, I can do that with color profiles. So clicking off of our standard color profile and going into a creative one like I made, we can start to decrease or increase this effect, right? I don't want to go too crazy because the goal is to make sure we're not taking this image too far in terms of the levels where I'm losing detail, and it's flattening those it's flattening that contrast. It's kind of pushing those things back. So what I like to do with my color profile is create less work for myself in the future. So a lot of times you'll see the highlights really brought down, the blacks kind of flattened, so we can start to bring back that tonality as we want versus starting with kind of a more good looking image contrast, but I want to start working from this creative look. So it's one click, I'm done, I apply it. Now, what I like to do is close my eyes. That sounds funny in a video, but then open them and look where the brightest spots in the image are, right? So in looking at her skin, I really like these luminous spots here, but I'm also kind of getting lost in how sort of drab and boring the sky is, but the sky is a pretty bright part of the image as well, so I'm not necessarily focusing here just yet. Even with these reds, I want to bring some of that out. That's where we can go into the target adjustment tool for hue, saturation, luminance, and tone curve to start clicking, dragging up and down to really start to make her pop and push the background, the sky, structure, and all that to the back. What I mean by that is basically breaking the tonality down to where she's coming towards us almost from a compositional perspective to where we're focused on her and all the other elements are secondary. All right, so tip number 2 is going to be target adjustment tools. These are very simple for you to activate, right? So Shift Option Command S. Boom, we automatically are accessing the saturation panel of the HSL tool in Lightroom. So what I can do is I can click on an area like the red dress and I want to add saturation, right? So I'm going to click and I'm just going to drag up. It's automatically going to just boost the crap out of those reds. Now, you have to keep in mind as we zoom in here, just make sure we can kind of move this around. It's also going to it's going to bring up the reds on her skin. So we definitely want to make sure as we're lifting this tool, it's going to add that into her skin. I'm also getting a little bit on this kind of redness that's all on my structure here. So you have to be careful, right? There's limitations in Lightroom. Biggest, and maybe this is tip number 6, right? One of the biggest tips or advice I can give you in Lightroom is understanding the limitation of this tool. There's a lot of limits to it, but there's a lot of impressive tools that that Lightroom can do as well. So this is one of them where you really want to be careful on what using sliders means. It's the entire image. It's not just your focal point. So we'll get to masking. We'll get to isolating areas with brushes and next. But with the HSL tool, you really want to be careful. So what I want to do is bring some of the reds up, but nothing too crazy. We can desaturate all this other stuff later, which we're going to anyways. So I'm not too worried about bringing those reds up. But bringing the dress back a little bit more with saturation, we can do the same thing with luminance, right? So Shift, Option, Command, L. We're going to brighten the dress. And now, as we start to zoom out, we really start to see the dress itself just pop off the page a little bit more. And this is where you can spend just some quick adjustments to kind of bring back some of that original dress that we had, right? So you can always toggle with your backslash key before and after, which is pretty cool. So moving into the sky, I want to bring some blues. I want to darken the sky, right? It's the same thing. I'm going to use the saturation tool. I'm going to click in the sky and lift up. Bam, my blue sky's back. Pretty cool. Keep in mind, anything that's blue in this image is now going to be oversaturated. So if your subject has a blue dress on or blue clothing or anything like that, yes, that's affected. So this tool, knowing the limitations, knowing what I'm working with, not going to affect her skin or her garb. So we can do the blues. We can now hit the L key after holding Shift Option Command. We can darken the sky. So that kind of stuff. Now, something you really want to be careful of is how is that working in these different areas of the image? Is it creating weird banding and things like that? Because the darker you go, you're going to get some goofy looking edge, almost like chromatic aberration here. So that's something you definitely want to keep in mind. We're not enhancing those kind of things. But again, this is a down and dirty edit. We're not getting up with the loop. We're not printing a 20 by 30 print from Lightroom here. We're just trying to get a nice down and dirty edit and something quick. I'm already 3 minutes in. It's a target adjustment tool. That's how HSL works. It's pretty great tool. If I wanted to desaturate this other area, you see how I'm desaturating that. It's reds. It's killing the dress. So just keep that in mind. We'll have to isolate this probably with our graduated tool, graduated filter tool later. I want to jump into tone curve real quick. Great tool, very fast for now using the target adjustment. I want to drag down. It's going to bring my shadows down. As you can see, it's doing it to the entire image. So we have to really be careful in what parts of the image we're starting to manipulate. We can grab in these grays and start to mess with some of these areas here. So as you can see, we can't necessarily limit the black point, but that's something where we can lift that up there, take the white point down if we really wanted to mute that a little bit more, and then come back in with the target adjustment tool, kind of increase some pop there. So again, just a little bit of some adjustments to bring back some of that pop, but also have some cool toning in the background. Now, keep in mind, we're probably going to dodge the client some more and work on this, so I'm not too worried about how kind of back to normal this is getting, if you will. So I can increase my color profile and we can go right back, right? But you don't want to chase things, right? You want to bring all that tonality back, and now you're increasing the color profile and then bring the tonality back. So just to kind of show you those two different things, this really gets my image ready to start prepping it for the next tip, which is going to be using the radio filter and inverting it. All right, so now we're ready for tip number 3. Tip number 3 is going to be using the radial filter inverted. So we can hold shift and hit the M key, and that opens up our radial filter. As you see, I already have this invert option selected. Here's why. So when I drag my oval over top of my subject here, it's going to basically mask out everything that's within this area, and it's going to paint everywhere else. So this oval isn't really customizable in terms of its size. I can't really fill in the bottom here just yet. I'll have to use a brush to do that in just a moment, but I want to make sure my subject is covered for the most part, and we can get started. So what I would likely apply is a burn to where it's going to burn down the highlights, right? So as we have the inverted option applied, when I uncheck that, boom, now it's burning down everything except what's in this radial filter. So it's just a quick way to burn down 90% of our image. And if I want to increase the size of this on our subject, I can make sure we have a little more flexibility there. So I can increase the feather, decrease the feather. It's a little intense there, but you can see right away how we can have that kind of pop on them. Now if I increase that size, maybe to something like this, I'll have a lot less dodge work to do. So my next thing that I'd want to apply is likely a color range to use in this as well, which is an awesome range masking tool. I can use the color range to start painting in areas that I want. So when I grab my dropper tool, I can hold shift because I'm going to click in different areas that I want this effect to apply to. Make sure that I'm kind of grabbing all of those, and I can always hit my O key to see what's being filtered and what's filtered out. And what you'll notice here is if I turn off the range mask, um, it gets much more precise in here from the dress, right? So if I go back a couple steps on picking some of these areas, you can see as this mask progresses where it started. This might have been a better tool for me to start with. Background, make sure that I'm choosing the areas that aren't green. That's very important. It kind of helps to work this way. And you can change your mask as well in viewing it. I think it's tools, adjustment mask, yeah, overlay, and you can change the colors, right, if I wanted it to be different ones. So you always want to use something that's um, different color than everything else in your background. So we can choose some of this stuff back here, but again, we have to remember that we have our mask here that's being applied. We're going to have to paint in some of this other stuff. So as we grab a brush and we want to add in some of these other areas, we can. Now, you have to make sure the colors that you're choosing in the range mask and where you're painting are going to be added, or else it's not going to work. But the same thing's going to have to happen for painting off our subject. So with our brush turned on, holding option, we can remove this from her face. So this is probably going to be the most time intensive part of the edit, just because it's, you do a quick step to remove 90%, or excuse me, to applied burning to 90% of the image. but then you have to do all this fine-tune finessing with your brush. So um, these kind of things are going to matter when you're timing yourself on an edit and spending it. So you're probably wondering, well, how is this faster than Photoshop? And that's a great question. I think I can mask pretty fast in Lightroom, but let's say if you have a Wacom tablet and you're working in Photoshop's probably going to be faster. But this is just kind of showing you real quick how the in certain situations that radial filter inverting it can be a really quick, especially with the color range masking, to get your subject isolated. Now, this isn't perfect by any means, but again, it's a nice down and dirty edit. I like to leave my mask on so I can paint in these areas, get really close to her, overlap paint on her, and then we can just sort of remove that from her hair. And it's a burning, so we're burning this down, so it's not going to be super off in what we want to do here. So make sure to kind of get in some of these areas from our filter there, and that's it. You could do the same thing with a adjustment brush, but you'd have to paint everything first and then mask out. The radial filter, it's a click and it kind of just does that real fast. So that's why I like to use that tool. So again, here's where we are. I'm going to turn off the mask so you can see what's going on here and hide some of these tools. Yeah, so we don't have to stare at the so we can burn some of these things down. Background, add some clarity if we wanted to do that on this layer. I like to kind of save that, but here's where we can already take our image, and you can see the haloing that's going on back here. So if we, with our mask turned off as we're painting these things in, that's where those details are really going to kind of stick out. So you want to make sure we're bringing those back in. We're not creating haloing, so we might have to overlap her arm a bit. But just a really quick way to kind of have that cool toning effect. And again, I mean, I'm continually impressed with Lightroom and using some of these techniques I would use in Photoshop to do it here. So we're getting a little long-winded on this tip, but again, I told you it's the most time-intensive one for the radial filter. Something else, if you want to go in, is you can widen your range, of course, for your color mask. So if we wanted to increase the amount, we can do that where it'll start to overlap on the hat a little bit. We can decrease it and or remove some. So if we're missing any areas or we want to make sure there's not any lower opacities in the structure of the sky, we can increase some of those things in the background there using our brush here to make sure all those little details zooming in really kind of help our image out and doing some of that stuff. So yeah, here is with it on and off. This is probably what you're more interested in seeing. All the difference in just burning down the background for this image. So we're not done. Let's move on to the next spot, which we will, once we've erased it off the skin, we're ready for the graduated filter. This is another big tool that you can do larger adjustments to like the sky to quickly mask in this, mask out everything but the sky, the structure, the foreground, the background. So we're going to jump onto that tool next. All right, so we're ready for tip number 4, and that's going to be the graduated filter. Many of you probably already use this tool, but it's definitely an essential one for burning in your sky. Pretty simple to activate. Hit the M key, and we immediately have the graduated filter. This tool basically starts and ends where you click and drag the mouse. So if I want the top all the way down to down into here where the sky meets the structure or the horizon line, I'll click there, drag down, and release it. And it's automatically going to apply um, my graduated filter. For some reason it's not. Um, let's see, reset. There we go. I'm not sure why it wasn't applying at first. So if you hit the O key, you automatically see how we can change the size of this. I think if you hold, yeah, option, you can increase that gradient, which you can increase that. I don't really need to do a very intensive gradient here, but I basically need it to overlap there. So part of the issue with this, and that's not very straight. So I'm going to go ahead and undo. I'm going to reset my gradient, and I'm going to hold shift while I click so it stays straight. So as you see right here, it's going to be over top of our subject, over the structure. We just want the sky. So color range, mask to the rescue, using our dropper, and just with a few clicks, we're already masking everything else out. Um, so if I want those excuse me, those mountains in the background to be added in, I can. I don't think I do. Want that kind of stuff added in. But that's it. That's all I really need to do. It brings that in. And so if I need to make changes to the mask, I can do that by clicking, and it will increase that, decrease that. It does a pretty good job. So I want to make sure that comes all the way down, so that's perfectly fine. So that's it. That's the masking. Now for the effects and the cool part. So if I want to have an intense sky, I have, you know, a few presets, way off from what I would want here. I don't want to bring that much blue in. That just looks disgusting. So I'm not even. I'm going to go ahead and reset these sliders. I don't want any of those. Those look terrible. So going into what I would do is I would, increasing contrast right away. That's what I want to do. I want to increase that contrast. And just to make sure our tool is being applied to this bottom area, which it is, it's going to bring some of those blues back in. And so I probably want to lower this to make sure it's being applied to all areas. I don't know why it doesn't seem to be applying here as well. But maybe it is. Just a weird part of the sky. So I want to increase the contrast, so it's going to bring blues in that I don't like. So I'll desaturate those to bring my sky back to a little more of a kind of gray, gloomy sky. I can do a few other things as well. Add clarity, of course, as I want to create a little more intense sky. Now, something we want to make sure is we're talking about the edges of the sky and some of these areas start to not look good. Like I already don't know what's going on here. Is that happening from this? Yes, and it is applying to the entire image, so it's not masked off from these guys here. So if we want to limit the mask as well, we can. So if some of that stuff's being applied to the entire image, as we can see, it's being applied to our little sculptures there. We can slowly add the amount in to where that stuff fills in. Now, obviously, if we can't limit that part, then I think it's going to make sense to have a really low amount and then just paint in these areas at the top. And this is going to happen. This is where there's shortfalls with using shortcuts. So what we have to do is we'll actually have to erase the effect on the bottom part here, because the shortcut that we took and changing the amount, you can't paint in an area. As I'm clicking, I can't add this area in because I've limited that as part of the range mask for color. The only way that area is going to be added in, excuse me, is if I increase the amount. So I have to take it back to where we had it, and then I'd actually have to go in and erase on all of my structure now. This is kind of a huge pain and not really a time saver, for this section of the image. So with something like this, I might want to reset the range mask, put all that back on there, and try and add some more droppers from my color range. So if I reset, click and add, range mask color, and that area automatically adds that in. That's going to be a little bit better. So I just need to be a little more careful on where I'm choosing that specific color. It's way too much. Something a little more medium would be there, and I think that's going to better limit. We don't have as much on them, and then I can decrease this to make sure it's not being applied. So it's definitely going to help us here, but again, we're losing some of this up top here, so I don't know if we can really get it perfected, but we can try. So I think I'll leave the mask alone at that level, and do some of those things that we were working on. So contrast, desaturation, clarity, some of those quick things to kind of toggle this on and off. It's kind of bringing in some odd characters there. So now we can do the opposite and create a new one for just the foreground. So if we want to have it apply, well, wouldn't really need to go that large. All the way up through here, it's going to, since we clicked and dragged upward, it's going to bring a gradient from the bottom. So then we would go in and do color range again, grab our dropper tool and look for a specific spot. Of course, while we're doing this, we want to turn on our mask, and that's going to do a pretty good job of grabbing everything and reducing as much of the sky as we can. Grab a different spot, that doesn't do as good of a job. That one does pretty good job. And then since we're using the range mask tool, whatever gets added can just be erased, which is a little bit easier to do when it's just affecting our subject a bit here. So we can just kind of go in and remove that from her. That seems simple enough. So we zoom out, turn off our mask, and do kind of that same thing. If we want to add a different level of clarity, maybe we want to add more clarity um, to make this a little more intense, we can do that to the foreground. This is something where now I want to kind of desaturate this part of the image a little bit more. So we can kind of get that redness out of it, and maybe add a little bit of green tint. That will help with our image here. Add some dehaze. We'll decrease the dehaze. And start to really bring some of those characters out in our image. We'll get into sharpening in just a minute, but that's kind of where I'd want to take the image kind of a little bit further. As you can see what we've added from going here to bringing in a little more tonality and sharpening back into our image. And so we are ready to move on to the next tip, which will be the attention to details sharpening adjustment. All right, we've already spent a good amount of time on our image, kind of explaining things and going through. We are on tip number 5, finally. This is the masking, sharpening, and using noise reduction. So just jumping into the details panel, we're going to have an exclamation point next to our image because you want to be working 1-to-1 or at 100% on your image. Now, I probably want to take this another step forward And as you can see, I want a little more sharpness out of my background, as well as softening some of her skin. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the Option key and I'm going to click on the amount slider and just start dragging it to the right. So now that I kind of have more sharpness that I want in my image and kind of at a level I want, now her face is getting super gritty and starting to not look very good. So we need to even out the lighting on her face, and we'll cover that with masking in just a second. So with the radius tool, holding Option, we can kind of fine tune some of our details in our sharpening, as well as we can use masking, right? So I don't necessarily want to mask out her face because now we're masking out the background. It doesn't really make sense. I don't have a way to really get um, it to mask the background and not on her face without doing just some masking work. Noise reduction, I don't necessarily need to apply to the entire image, but I just want to add some sharpening to our entire shot, right? So just kind of showing the difference, little difference between what that sharpening can do. It just brings out some um, those details in the background. So and as well as the dress. So let's jump into the adjustment tool and work on how we can sort of take some of the sharpening off of her face and soften it. So what I will do is, making sure I don't have auto mask selected, I'm just going to paint onto her face. And if I hit the O key, it will show me exactly where I am painting this. So if I go rather quickly, now if I turn on the auto mask, it'll only mask on her skin, which does a pretty good job um, overall. So if I jump down here, increase that a little bit, I can apply this hopefully just to her hands and arm. Obviously some of this got a little overlapped. We can just erase that, not a problem. Same goes for up here, just to get rid of some of that softness. So this is where we're going to be focused. I'm zoomed in at probably like 200%, so um, turn off our mask. And now what we want to do is to soften the face. You know, you would think, okay, well, if I just decrease the sharpening, that should get rid of the sharpening effect that we applied here. Well, not exactly. To a certain point, it does a pretty good job. If I want to reduce noise reduction or remove it, I can remove the noise reduction that's being done on the entire image. Let me show you what I mean. So if I increase the noise reduction to like a ridiculous amount, it softens her face, but then also the background. If I want to remove the noise reduction, it brings it back to a state where it was before. So that works really well if you're trying to remove noise like in the sky or something like that. And you want to bring back mass and completely bring back to the noise levels that were there that don't need noise reduction. You can do that. So I'm going to turn that off. And as you can see, her face stayed the same. So this isn't necessarily giving us that same effect there. But just a kind of quick tip on how you can use the detail panel and how this noise slider kind of interacts with the masking. So if I want to apply kind of a skin smoothing effect here, I can do that. Soften skin. There's a few different options. That looks terrible. A few other options. That looks really bad. One that I've created, we're just going to do basic level of skin smoothing. But what I like to do is I'll lower the contrast as well as the highlights, and um, if I lower the sharpening, that's not going to help us, so I'm turning that off. I think that technique is terrible. Dropping the clarity is works pretty well, but you have to be careful because the face just gets gray. Even with turning the highlight slider off, it's not going to help out. So dropping the clarity a little bit goes a long way. And then you can also work with your dehaze tool. We can do a little bit. See, then I think if we increase the noise too much, it starts to look a little off. We can lower the dehaze tool just a bit. We can help with some of those shadows if we lift that. So again, the harshness of her skin here versus softening it. This is a very kind of touchy and subjective part of the editing, depending on how smooth you really want to get this skin. But there's no denying that it really helps with this kind of intense lighting, just to kind of soften things up a bit. Of course, you don't want to make it look too unrealistic, like how could you have the soft light in here, everything else is intense. So use to your discretion, but I'm going to kind of go a little over the top on this, just to kind of show. I don't have the ability to turn off my auto mask. If you want to go in smaller increments with painting in, you can mess with flow and feather, all that kind of stuff. But this gives me just a real quick option to smooth and also bring back some of those details in the skin. And so I can definitely do that. Maybe even add another brush, and in decreasing the whites, just kind of helping, bring in little spots in the skin there. That can definitely help, and evening that out. Now, of course, if we want to go back here and we want to bring back in some sharpness, I think we should. I think it makes sense, to soften, but also make sure that the face looks better. So little thing like that, this is attention to details, finessing some of these. So if you build presets, you have those things built in, you have your techniques dialed in, and you don't have to explain this to yourself as you're editing. You can just do it. It will be much faster, but a huge tip, attention to details. And now we're ready to look at the results. And there you have it. It's all about the results. Learning new techniques in Lightroom and investing your time is so important. Lightroom continues to impress me daily as I find new tools, new ways of utilizing the masking tools, all these different techniques and things in Lightroom. There's a lot to be done. Same way with Photoshop, right? But what my goal is to do what I can to stay out of Photoshop, because I want to be able to edit multiple images at once, not have my computer, fans blowing, running intense, which Lightroom and some of the stuff we're doing is probably pushing Lightroom to its maximum capabilities, but I can work faster, I can work more efficient. That's important to me, saving time to get those same results. So the goal isn't to just slap on a preset. This isn't your typical Lightroom workflow is preset, global adjustments, making things um, good enough to preview to your client. I want to put something in front of them that they're ready to purchase and buy a print that day. So that way when they do, I spent, 5-10 minutes on an edit, and now they're looking at this great piece that they want to put in their house. Now I can go in, figure out the sizing I want to do, work on my output, spend a little more time in Photoshop. Now I'm ready to do that. So really be thinking about this as like a down and dirty, an edit that maybe you're posting online just real quick as a teaser to the client. And they're going to be impressed. They're going to be like, how did we just shot the wedding yesterday or did this shoot today, and now you have this quick edit for me to look at. That's insane, and it's just going to help with your client's experience, your presence, your expertise, sales, all that kind of immediacy. They want to see the images right away, probably texting you hours after the shoot. When am I going to see my images? I'm so excited. Why not bring an image to them before they're even asking? So the biggest thing with Lightroom and just any tools you're using is know the limitations. If you know the limitations of Lightroom, you are going to excel. It's going to help you be efficient with the editing, but it's also going to make sure when you export out and send something to print, it doesn't look like garbage when you're zoomed in on it. So it's very important as you're going back and forth on an edit. This could look good at the surface, but you're going to want to zoom in and make sure these details are taken care of and things like that. And so even as my image, like you just saw, had to load, the image wasn't soft. But you have to make sure when you're zooming into these details where we're gonna get, right? So at 100%, I'm very happy with the way this edit turned out. And this is something I could put together without having to explain and go through every level. This is, you know, a 5 to 7 minute edit, which isn't too bad for what we did here in Lightroom. Probably could do, you know, a little more work in Photoshop, but again, just doing something a little more simple, broken down. There's a lot to be done here. It's non-destructive. Very happy with that. So try some of these techniques out. Save some time editing and show off your images faster. That's what I'm looking to do here and give you the ability to do. So let me know what you think and tune in next month.